how do people really learn? At NewSpring, we create experiences with leading learning pioneers like Dr. Felipe Hartman, Julie Dirksen, and Lauren Waldman to explore just that and more. Don't miss our next Love to Learn experience, an event series to help and inspire you to create training based on how people learn best. Find out what's coming up at newspring.com/events.
If you're in workplace learning Technologies 2025 should definitely be on your radar. It's happening 23rd to 24th of April at Excel London, and the scale is huge. 11,000 visitors, 1,000 conference delegates, and a free exhibition with over 200 L&D solution suppliers. The conference theme, People, Technology in the Future, Decision Time, taps into the biggest topics in L&D right now. With 80 expert speakers and 30 sessions, they'll cover AI, skills, personal growth, and practical L&D essentials. Booking opens at the end of January. Check out learningtechnologies.co.uk for more info. More than mineral resources, more than military dominance, it's skills that produce the wealth of nations in the modern world. Sheep didn't start the Industrial Revolution in the United Kingdom. It was the skills to selectively breed those sheep and shear them, to spin their wool into thread, to weave that thread into cloth, the skills to design and build machinery that could automate the process, the sales and marketing and entrepreneurial skills to take those products to a global market, the legal skills to protect copyrights, etc., etc., etc. And when technology changes, when markets shift, the skills we need change too. Who spins wool nowadays? This time on The Learning Hack, we're all about skills.
Welcome to The Learning Hack, a podcast about the people and technologies that are creating the future of learning. I'm John Helmer.
Now guess what?
Learning is cool. Learning is cool. Learning is cool. I'm learning. Learning is fun.
Knowledge is power. Knowledge. Education.
Right now, we're in the middle of a massive change in technology and therefore a massive change in skills requirements. So I wanted to speak to somebody whose day job is helping organizations meet their skills needs and leveraging the best technology to do it. Come on down, Teresa Rose.
Hack Facts.
Teresa Rose is an award-winning learning and performance consultant and the founder of ConsultHer Ltd. With over 20 years of experience, she specializes in developing innovative learning strategies and performance solutions. Teresa has collaborated with global organizations to enhance workforce capabilities and drive organizational success. She is recognized for her expertise in leveraging technology to create impactful learning experiences. Teresa is also a sought-after speaker and thought leader in the field of learning and development. So Teresa, it's a great pleasure to have you on the podcast. Welcome to The Learning Hack.
Thank you, John. I'm really delighted to be here at last.
At last, yes, I'm sorry it took so long. I mean, this often is the case. I invite someone and say, I really want to have you on the podcast. And then I don't actually arrange the interview for a year. But you're here now. So let's start by talking about a key distinction you've highlighted, the difference between implementing skills technology versus implementing an LMS or an LXP, for instance. Can you unpack this for us? Because I didn't quite understand that, and explain why trust and incentives are so critical in making skills tech successful.
Yeah. Firstly, if we think about an LMS or an LXP, it comes with content. It comes with learning content normally, and that's what we're expecting people to consume and use on there. With the skills-based platforms, the users are the content. So it's their skills and information that we want them to continually update. And that's why trust and incentives are so important. So how do they trust that that data is being used in an ethical way? And what are the incentives for them to be on that platform and adding their skills data and updating it as well.
So the trust here is the kind of end user, the learner's trust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the end user's trust. It's also the manager's trust. It's also, if you think more broadly, if you're an organisation where performance management and people going into the system and setting objectives and managing those objectives is really low, then why would you expect that they're going to go into a skills-based platform and add similar data there?
Right, okay. And similarly, the incentives are there to sort of draw them along too.
Yes, and this links to something else that we might start discussing, which is your organisational processes and what goes on currently within those processes, and how you'll use them differently, how you'll manage those processes from a skills point of view.
Yeah.
What will change?
Okay. So someone who's unfamiliar with this type of technology like me, what's the difference between that and, say, a performance management system?
There's a lot of different platforms that work in very different ways around the skills tech. It's probably even a far more complex landscape than the learner management system, because it starts to link much more broadly with the tech ecosystem, with the performance, with the data ecosystem than probably an LMS and an LXP does. So there's where is the skills data being pulled from, both what you might already have and what's being added to it, and the interoperability between the different systems in your ecosystem, because there might be one platform that looks at skills in a completely different way to, say, the talent marketplace or whatever skills-based platform that you've bought, and then how it also generates that data might vary. So it might be, is the data added?
Yeah.
And it could be even hybrid, or is the data inferred? So is the artificial intelligence using inference model to infer the skills on people's role profiles in the system? Or is it even a hybrid model? Or is it something that you have to manually add the data there? It can vary considerably.
Okay. So there's a lot of detail in here, and this is why people like yourself are necessary to help people with the implementation there. So it's not so much just the technological side of it, the processes around it is a big thing.
Yes.
Skill validation is another area where there's a lot to consider. What is skill validation? What are the biggest challenges organizations face with it, and how can they approach those effectively?
Skills validation, I suppose, is around how useful is that data that you're getting on skills to make data-informed decisions and more objective decisions, and is what you're measuring what you want to measure. So it's like any other measurement, is testing the reliability and the validity of it, but it's also how useful that's going to be in the decisions you're taking, and how much time and resources you have to put into that as well. So it's where you might have far more, say, riskier decisions. So if you're hiring somebody in an executive level, then that's a high risk decision. Or if you're promoting someone into that role, then you need far more data points about that person and examples of how they're going to perform in your organisation or in the role. And that's why the reliability and the validity of any form of, well, whether we call it assessment or skills validation, it varies, needs a lot of thinking. It's not unlike, thinking around psychometrics and the validity and reliability of psychometrics.
Right. So lots of this will be to do with the quality of skills data that people have in their organisation when they start this year.
Yeah.
As somebody who goes into organisations and looks at that, what can you say about the quality of skills data that is generally available? Does it vary fantastically between organisations, or is it consistently low? Or
it really varies, and again, that's down to current data, how data's managed, how it's used to make decisions. So the culture around data in the organisation, in any case, but also how much data they have, because the skills platforms, that's why it goes back to the earlier point around the users are the data or the source of content.
Yeah.
It takes time to build up that information as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why the engagement and the trust and all of those things and all the work that comes beforehand is so critical. You can't really just think, we're going to get a skills platform and people will go on it and we'll get that data, won't we? It's not that easy.
So where does that data come from? Is it self-reported? In other words, people say what skills they've got. Is it linked to credentials, past job history, appraisals? What's the source of the skills data?
Again, it's a mixture. So if it's inferred from AI, then it's going to be of lower quality. Having said that, there are some systems out there that can take data within your work system. So it might be Teams or Slack or anything like that can infer from the work that people's doing. So that might be more reliable, but not all organisations are set up that way or have that data. And again, you've got to have quite an open culture. What's your knowledge sharing culture like for that data to be picked up? So if someone asks a question in a Teams chat, who's responding to that? What information are they giving? Or if you use GitHub or something like that and it pulls the data from there, it really depends. You can't have a one-size-fits-all around this. It really depends what sector the organisation is in. It might even be that you manage that differently across different parts of a very broad, complex organisation.
Yeah. And so I suppose the reason people got very excited about using AI for this area is that it's good at unstructured data. But is there also an issue there with, well, you might be using kind of CVs and job applications to draw that data, perhaps. I'm just guessing here. I really know nothing about this. I'm really interested in it. So I'm getting so granular. I mean, a lot of people will probably know a lot more about me about this who are listening. But if you take, for instance, the difference between a CV, it's not against the law to lie on your CV. It is against the law to lie on a formal job application. That's my understanding anyway. But both those two types of data might be... So, an AI can kind of make inferences based on unstructured data, but there is an issue of kind of trust in the first place and authenticity. Yes,
and some of these systems will pull on a CV or they'll pull on a LinkedIn profile. And so that data is then, well, how reliable is it? Well, it's probably not that reliable. So there might then be other sources of skill validity, and that might be from the manager or someone who knows that person's work.
Yeah.
And a mixture of quantitative and qualitative data as well. So it's not purely just a statistic. It might be statements about that person's work. It might be a worked example that someone has to do as part of that validation. It might also be peer reviews and validation as well. So the more depth of data you get, the more reliable and valid it is. So if we start at the beginning with some AI inference, or if it's market data from job roles, those job roles might not be relevant to your context.
Yeah.
So even if it's pulling on in your base system and you go in and it's pulled in data before managers and staff have gone in there to, say, validate those skills or add more data, it's really quite a low level because it's looking at market data on, say, similar roles to what are in your organisational structure. And that might not be relevant at all with the types of tasks, the work and the context that your people are involved in, which is why it needs that further data verification.
Are there any problems with the basic, what is the definition of a skill, for instance?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. There are so many different definitions out there. And then also we start talking about, well, isn't skills just competencies? And there are even different definitions between the difference between skills and competencies. When I think about a skill, I think, well, is it describable? Can you describe the work that's delivered as a part of using that skill? Is it measurable? So it goes back to that validity point. Can we measure that skill and that information around that skill, is it learnable?
Yeah.
So is that something that we can, because we talk a lot about reskilling and upskilling, or is it purely something that's more of an attribute? And that's much bigger. So if we say, oh, well, creativity or critical thinking, I don't really feel, and looking at a lot of the research around that is a skill. It's an attribute. So if you change the question and ask someone, well, rather than what skills would an ideal person to fit role X have, what attributes? And you start to have a different conversation then.
Yeah, people have pointed out kind of the problems with so-called 21st century skills, things like empathy. Is it a skill or not? And that's a good point. Is it a skill or an attribute? Whereas, I don't know, bicycle maintenance is a skill, isn't it? It's like woodworking. We've talking a lot with an example recently where if you look at the role of woodworking, what skills might you have there? It might be, well, you can make great dovetail joints. That's a skill. Yeah.
So it's thinking of it that way. But you might say, well, the creativity or the design side, is that more of an attribute?
Yeah.
So some of it might be learnable, but some of it might be a natural trait or a personality trait, because skills is just one part of it. So thinking that you're going to put skills or competencies for people using that in, and that's going to be linked to organisational goals.
Yeah.
And then the individual will have goals, and then you're going to have a collective that results in organisational performance. Is thinking of it far too simply, because there are so many other dimensions to achieving organisational performance than putting skills in place.
Yeah, I mean, to complicate it further, we always used to talk about transferable skills.
Yeah.
Which I always think is how I've managed to have a career, because I'm quite old. An awful lot of the jobs I might have been trained for when I left school at 18 no longer exist, and I think the reason I managed to be employable is because I did a kind of quite abstract English degree, and it sort of gave me a deep understanding of how language works. I like to think it does anyway. And you can kind of add on as a foundation which you can build communication skills and sales skills. You and I have both worked in telesales environments, so we know what that's about. It's much more granular than the general thing, but underlying that is a transferable skill. I know that kind of half-life of skills has. I'm kind of groping towards a question here, so you have to bear with me, I'm afraid. I know that the kind of nature of the half-life of skills has always been a concern for education, because they know that student they're educating, they need to be educated for the rest of their lives, and there is a half-life to skills. It's more recently become a concern of organisations that they need to kind of equip people for the fact that jobs might well disappear, especially now in the AI age. But that hasn't had a really, I don't think, satisfactory response from most people's point of view. When we talk about things like 21st century skills, it's all a bit vague and airy-fairy. I don't know if there is a question there. It's more a reflection. What would you say to that?
On future skills, I was looking back to the World Economic Forum's list of skills that I made a note of, that they said future skills in I think it was 2019, and they're not dissimilar to the ones that they talk about now. And it's really lifting the bonnet and looking at, well, where do they get this data from? What's the evidence for it?
Yeah.
And again, are they pulling from job roles that are out there, or job roles that they expect to be out there, which again doesn't necessarily relate to your organisation. So I have seen and worked with clients where they've gone on future skills campaigns and spent ages maybe building lots of learning pathways or content on skills that don't necessarily have any usefulness there and then. I remember when I first came into learning and development, when we were talking about, is it just in case or at the point of need? The just in case learning, and that feels very much like it's just in case. So it tends to be a wasted resource if there isn't a need for that skill.
Yeah.
And when I spoke at learning technologies on this topic around skill sensing. And Peter Shepherd from Ericsson was on the panel as well, and that's something that they use. And he talked about how they use skill sensing networks. So it's about what's going on internally in your organisation, in your market, and looking obviously at external data as well. That gives, and having people throughout the organisation, and that's part of skills governance too, which is a whole other topic.
Yeah,
is how do you decide where and when to update your roles? What are sunrise sunset roles? What are sunrise sunset skills? And that's still linked to the work that needs to be done.
If you're looking to connect with the top minds in learning and talent, there's no better place than an iVentiv event. That's IVENTIV. Since 2009, they've hosted nearly 300 interactive conversational events exclusively for senior leaders like global heads of learning. I've been a sponsor myself and found these events invaluable. Less about sitting and listening, more about real, impactful conversations. It's an unmatched opportunity to collaborate with leading chief learning officers on the challenges they're tackling today. Join the conversation. Visit iventiv.com/learninghack. That's iventiv.com/learninghack.
So you've said that adopting skills technology isn't just an L&D initiative. It's about system change and new ways of working. And I think the conversation we've had so far really bangs that home. Can you expand on this? How do organisations need to adapt to make it work?
It's also thinking about, what benefit is it going to deliver for your organisation? Do you need to go down this skills-based route because certain papers say you should do it? I've been recommended a book by Julia Goddard called I think it's Uncommon Sense.
Yeah.
So because we see everybody following a trend, we think we should do it. But I've also been doing a lot of thinking as well around organisational development, because I've got a background in OD.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a lot of organisational development and systems thinking that links to skills-based approaches, or I like to prefer to call it skills-informed. And there's nothing wrong with changing the thinking on that, because there are so many, I don't like that word, moving parts around this, that you have to think of it from a system. You can't think, we're going to do a reskilling or an upskilling focus. It's far much more, what other problems do you start to necessarily create that you hadn't realised are going to get uncovered if you start to go down this route? And I've seen organisations as well that don't start to look at their processes at the outset and the change management that's required, and focus so much energy on the implementation of the technology. And as I said at the front end of this, it's so much more different than a learner management system and an LXP, because there's got to be all those incentives. There's got to be the trust. There's got to be a reason for people to use that data across the organisation and add to it. So if you're going to put something like a talent marketplace in, and that's one part of being skills-based, then if you've got the fluidity of your labour market, internal labour market, to have those opportunities, will managers let people go and rather than hold on to them? So you need to start looking at all of those different data points and behaviours and mindsets and ways of working to establish, what do you need to change in order to be skills-based, way before you start to talk about and think about the technology. I think there's often a drive like, we're going to get the technology, everybody else is getting these platforms in, so we need to too, without doing all of that groundwork that really needs to happen to make it successful.
Okay, so let's pull out a couple of threads from that that very good answer you gave there. Let's talk about process mapping. Before even looking at the technology, you emphasise the importance of process mapping as a skill for HR and L&D professionals. Mm-hmm. Why is this step so crucial, and what's it look like in practice? I mean, what is it for idiots like me?
I think somebody that I would say, if you're going to look at process mapping, is look at Guy W. Wallace as one person that shares so much content. Yes, around this. But it goes to a lot of the points I've made. Because it's data, you've got to think about all of your data sources. Where have you got gaps? And start to map that out and the architecture, and then start to break that down into, well, we might want to look at skills around a particular process because it's not working well for different people in the organisation. That could be it's not working well for managers. You've got different data, say from pulse surveys or employee engagement, and start to map out that process as is. And it's not unlike using design thinking and journey mapping as well for this, to think about what and get the data from your employees as well. So that starts to be the change management, is the doing with rather than doing to, is to start to work with different groups on these processes. Where is there friction? Where might skills data help with making decisions, with promoting people, with making work more equitable, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
But it also could be something like you've got a new product. You've got you want to enter a new market. Starting that from the ground up is probably easier than trying to unpick an existing process. And it might be that you've got a new division starting. I know there's one of my clients that has a whole new area on digital.
Yeah.
So that can be looked at from the ground up. What does that look like from a skills point of view? And again, an organisation that I would look at as well that have done this, if you're quite new to it and you're quite a new organisation, or you've got an area that you're starting from scratch, is what Sandra's done at EPAM Systems, because they are skills based from day one.
Right. What this is making me think is how, if the process mapping thing really is about kind of objectives, what you want to end up doing with that, how it functions in the organization, how different might that be between different organizations? I mean, if it's wildly different, doesn't that mean you kind of have to look at slightly different definitions of the skills, the way you define skills in one organization from the way you're doing another? Is that the case?
Yeah, it could be, but it really goes back to some of the attributes that I mentioned before when I talk about the attributes of skills. So is it describable? Does it link to the work that you do? So there might be things that are generic that you might be able to pull from proprietary skills taxonomies. There might be definitions of skills that are really very, very specific to your organisation. But from the processes, yes, they're going to vary. One person's talent management process or promotion process might vary from another organisation's.
Yeah, is that a problem for the learn tech providers, because what they want is one system to rule them all?
Yeah, because then you've got to shoehorn, and that's where you start to see this. So it's like, this is why it's so important to have these processes mapped to give to potential vendors. How well do those processes fit into technology that you're looking at, rather than waiting until implementation, which is, again, something I see a lot, and I've seen this with learning as well. You start to implement, and then you're asking the questions that you should have been asking at RFP, because you haven't done that deep work into what business processes would go into this platform, and can they be managed, or do we need to spend a lot of money on configuration, or do we need to do things differently because the technology drives us to do it differently? And then we've got even more of a headache with change management.
Let's get on to change management, because I can see you seem to be keen to get onto it. More things to ask really about how that relates to the vendor market, which I suppose is something I know more about, but maybe we can leave that or subsequent interviews. Change management often seems to come as an afterthought in these kind of projects. You've suggested that co-creation is the key. What's effective co-creation look like? How does it shift the change management process?
So co-creation is it goes back to my earlier point about the process maps, and it's bringing the people in the room that are going to be impacted by that change, and not leaving it until much later. So it tends to be that typical change management is, we've got the message, we cascade it down through different channels, and it's done much, much later on in the process, rather than saying, working with people, say, we're thinking of doing this. What are your thoughts? Do you want to work with us on this? This is what we're looking to deliver. This is what the external, internal information's telling us, and finding those champions that are interested in doing that in the organisation and working with them from the start. And that includes employees, managers, business stakeholders. But it goes back to organisational development again, which is about human-centred change.
Right.
So it's doing with and dialogue rather than it's top-down change. So it's all about dialogue and working with people in a collaborative way. It sounds like buzzwords saying, co-creation and collaboration.
Yeah.
But it's about working as a team.
Yes.
It's really about that, having a team that's resourced to work on the project, and that is another point, is the resource to do it as well, because it does take a lot of work, a lot of time, and a lot of resource.
I'm trying to think of the change management programs that I've been involved in, and also the kind of academic model for that, for change management. Do they involve co-creation? I can't remember whether they do or not.
Not so many do. No, they tend to be like the Lewins. Kurt Lewin would be the model of change that most people think of, or it's the unfreeze, refreeze. That one, freeze, unfreeze, refreeze. Forget which way round it is.
Yeah.
Or there's the 8 steps of change, but it's far more difficult than trying to go through a framework. And then you start to think of some of the other OD models, like congruence and incongruence, to things align or not align.
Yeah.
You've got things like the Burt Lewin model of change. There's lots and lots of models out there.
Yeah.
But again, it's things don't fit neatly into a model. People don't fit neatly into a model.
Yeah.
And you're dealing with people. People are complex.
I mean, from my own experience, I've seen the value of co-creation in brand projects, which are really, in essence, change projects if they're really good. And worked in initiatives where we've done a lot of co-creation and got people to kind of creatively involve in actually creating and roughing out the brand, what it looked like, and so on. I just, was astonished at how effective those were, and how much they stuck, and how good what came out of them. So I do appreciate what you're saying. How can organisations assess their readiness for adopting a skills-based or skills-informed approach, I should say? It's the terminology you prefer. What are the signs that this kind of transformation will help reduce friction rather than add to it?
I think it goes back to a lot of the points I've made, is assessing the type of culture that you have around labour flexibility, for one, around promotion. So it goes back to a lot of points I've made. And I've been working and developing myself like a cultural diagnostic and assessment. There's a small part of that on my website that people can have a little try with.
Yeah.
So I've seen some maturity frameworks out there, but again, it's more around the tech and the skills-based approach.
Yeah.
I'd be looking at it across lots of different dimensions to assess the readiness for that, and that then gets you to look at what's that degree of change you're going to need. But I think it's also very dangerous to look at it as an organisation as a whole. And again, I see that as a major pitfall. Is it's starting small in one area, because it is so complex and complicated, and also based on the size and scope of an organisation, is to start to look at some of those things in an area, and that gets again to the co-creation. And then if you create that success, others will want to follow suit. And I think there is that, and I can understand that from the vendor's point of view. There is a drive to sell a product that's going to go out across the whole organisation, because it's enterprise software. So it's like, well, they would want to do that, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
But it's a risky approach.
Yeah, it does seem to me. I was thinking earlier that as far as the vendor market is concerned, what tends to happen with products here is that, okay, it's recognised that one size doesn't fit all, cliche.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of complexity in this. What tends to happen then is that
Mm-hmm.
you will get consultants like yourself saying, well, if you want this type of approach, you want that LMS, but if you want something that's a bit more blah, 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 you want that one. So you get a kind of diversification of products. Then on the other hand, you also get people who want the really big systems. They become
Mm-hmm.
infinitely configurable. More and more configuration goes into the feature set, and so become rather kind of heavyweight, extremely expensive, and involve more consultancy hours than they do actual kind of license fees,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps. It's typically the way that the tech market responds to stuff like that. Do you see any signs of that happening in the vendor market, either of those two trends?
What I'm starting to see, which is interesting, is more of a work assessment. So there's vendors that are out there that are looking at the work rather than the skills and the tasks, and then the skills come later, because the work does come first. Then it's the tasks to achieve that work, and then it's the skills. So they're looking at it in a more holistic way. So that's more exciting for me.
Could this be a new kind of platform category?
Yeah, a work analysis. But then there's also some of the areas that people wrestle with around this, looking at more broadly in HR, is workforce strategic workforce planning.
Yeah.
And skills is seen as an answer to solving the strategic workforce planning conundrum. But I see I'm hoping that more of this work technology and work analysis will help to solve that more so than, say, necessarily the skills-based platforms.
Yeah. That phrase work analysis makes me feel that we're kind of going back full circle to Taylor.
Time and motion.
Work study. Time and motion.
Time and motion work studies. So it's like some of the old ideas end up becoming seemingly new ideas with tech bolted on, don't they?
Yeah, and Guy Matthews has a phrase for that, which I think he got from someone else, was what's old is new again. Yeah.
Yeah. So
the idea of skills portfolio management, does that relate to this? Can you explain what that is and why it's becoming important?
That's thinking around what skills are giving your organisation most value. So that links to the work. So what skills do you, if you manage the skills as a portfolio, where do you put more resource for reskilling and upskilling? What is delivering most value for the bottom line in the organisation and also to your clients, customers? So starting to get the data, and that's important. You've got to build the infrastructure of the data to start to be able to analyse that.
Okay.
But that also looks at as well the work that you might do up front with that co-creation, working with your stakeholders and your team, etc. Your teams is to analyse what work is delivering the most value.
Okay. So thinking commercially about skills, how can organisations identify the tasks that add the most value and use this to prioritise skill development? And how do they measure success in that area?
That again goes back to some of the points that I've made. Is looking with the organisation. What's the strategy, and the strategy does change. So what that links again to earlier conversation around the danger of linking skills directly purely to organisational goals. But it starts to pull on different data sources in the organisation, looking at the P&L, being financially aware, looking at any company documents that you can start to analyse when you're doing that work up front, to then start to build that data lake. I'm not a data expert as such, but I'm data literate. So I will ask the questions and what insights are you taking from this data, and what's the culture in the organisation? Because I've often worked with my business stakeholders, and they might be using data, but there isn't any narrative around that data.
Right.
So it's how is data used in conversations already for making business decisions.
Right. Okay. So
but it is a complicated one to unpack, that one.
Yeah,
to give a carte blanche answer that's a one-size-fits-all for an organisation.
Absolutely. Hence your job, I suppose. For L&D professionals, moving into roles like product or content managers is a significant shift. How does this play out in practice, especially when it comes to designing reskilling journeys?
This is a critical thing, I think, with skills. Is lots of these skill platforms have different proficiency levels, and they vary between the platforms that you might get in. So you could have a proficiency level that's 4 levels. You could have up to 8 levels. And then that provides complications for managing your learning portfolio, learning experiences, learning content, resources.
Yeah.
How do you start to differentiate the content? So it's really important then for L&D to manage those learning products and experiences in line with the skills. So how do I know I'm moving from a level 1 to a level 3? What's the journey for me?
Yeah.
And that starts to link into that skills portfolio management. So what skills are most important to me and my role? How do I know that from the data that you're gathering inside the organisation? So how can you help direct me in a way to for my journey, my particular journey that I need to move my proficiency level that's for a target role, say?
Yeah.
Because someone might say, I know I want to move into this target role. And some of these systems will provide journeys, career journeys, inside of the skills-based system. But then what have you got to support me in the organisation? How do I get there? What are my skill gaps? And how is learning and development going to help me in those skills gaps to increase, say, a proficiency level that might need to be higher to get promotion into a certain role?
Yeah. So in the age of competencies, there were proficiency levels within competencies. And
yes,
is this just a complete chaos? Do they not map from one organisation to another, from one profession to another?
No, they don't. Well, there might be in a platform mapped from one organisation to another.
What is the point of having it? Isn't it just kind of adding extra complexity that? I can see that the difference in kind of proficiency level between a medical intern and a consultant is quite significant, and you want to have one working on the job, one operating on you, not the other. Blah blah blah. But haven't we created a huge mess with all this?
I would say that it can be worth it. So I know there's a paper that Mark Efron wrote that's called "Is the Juice Worth the Squeeze?" And it asks a lot of really useful questions, some of which I've covered in the session today. But it can be worth it, but it is complicated, and that's even in purely looking at learning. There are so many. There's research. I asked. I'm a member of the Oxford Review. And they look at all the research around different people practices. I asked for them to gather the research on competencies and skills. And from all that research, there needs to be 124 plus conditions for individual performance alone. So, and skills is just one part of that. And that goes to all of the things I've been discussing earlier around the systems thinking, what's going on in the organisation, what happens with performance, what type of managers have you got? All of those things contribute to it. So it is complicated, and whether it's worth it is a big question that still remains to be answered, because some of this is quite new, and it takes a lot of time to get there. And even when you start to look at the research out there around the benefits, some of that is very intangible. Some of that you can't really get the data under the bonnet, and that is even vendor reports. So there's still, because it takes time, there needs to be a lot more evidence that's gathered around this, really more robust evidence that's not purely just vendor white papers, that's not purely HR saying how great it is, because we don't really hear a lot from the business, from our stakeholders and from employees. And I think that also is around the way that generally is our typical way to go about these things within HR and learning and development, and not do that co-creation and not work with and even stop things. So there is that danger that we start things and don't say, actually, no, this isn't working, let's stop it. Often we don't do that. There's all these different cognitive biases around it, and some cost fallacy and all of those things.
Yeah.
It's a very long answer, I know.
No, but it's difficult stuff, and we've uncovered a lot of complexity here in this. So I think the juice has been worth the squeeze, so to speak, because I feel as if I've learned an awful lot. And it might feel like we've ended up in a place of, well, I just don't know. But in fact, we've not. I think one really strong message comes across to me is that if anybody tells you this is either A, this is very simple, follow this model and you can do it like that, or B, it's very complex, but AI will sort it out for us. Neither of those two things is true. There's a lot of judgment about will the juice be worth the squeeze? What effort we're going to have to put into doing this? Is this useful complexity, or can we cut through it in certain ways? And the answers to those questions will probably be specific to your organisation rather than some general thing that you might put on a PowerPoint and hear at a conference. So I think it's been really useful, brain-taxing interview for me, and thank you very much for opening that up. Lastly, where can listeners go to learn more about the topics we discussed today, and where do you go yourself for inspiration and insights into skills and learning?
Okay. From me, I will post periodically on LinkedIn. Tends to be academic references that I'll put on there as well, and asking questions around skills. I've been on a few other podcasts that people can find. My website's got some resources on there as well. But in terms of others, I'd say, Sandra at EPAM, but bearing in mind that that's an organisation that have done this from day one. So it's completely different. I would say as well that I think a lot of the stuff around design thinking and using those approaches would be good. And Guy, I mentioned Guy W. Wallace. Has got he gives so much content to the profession, and it's really useful. And the red thread research as well for the tech side of this. So they've done a lot of really useful research around the vendors in this space and what they offer as well.
Marvellous. Well, as I say, it's been brain taxing, but really useful. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm sure other people will think so as well. Thank you very much for sharing your time with us today, Teresa.
Thank you, John.
That's all on the Learning Hack podcast for this time. The Learning Hack is completely independent and transparently funded by sponsorship. If you want to help others find us, please like, follow, rate, review and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice or on YouTube.
The Learning Hack is among the top 5% of shows most listened to globally, according to Listen Notes. And if you think your organisation could benefit from sponsoring the Learning Hack, or from using our knowledge and resources to start your own learning podcast, you can contact me on john@learninghackpodcasts.com. Until next time.
Stay curious, learning people.
Now I finally get it.